Get this light right. Okay. Welcome to the top 10 at 10. Today is May the 26th, 2014, and these are the top 10 news stories. Starting here. Story number 10. So from Consortium News, this is a really great breakdown. This, I guess, came out Friday by Robert Perry about the State Department's Ukraine fiasco. American diplomacy, by definition, is supposed to advance the national interests of the United States, not contribute to international crises that undermine those interests. Yet, by that standard, the U.S. State Department and Secretary of State John Kerry have failed extraordinarily in the current Ukraine crisis. Besides ripping Ukraine apart and getting scores of Ukrainians killed, the U.S.-supported coup in February has injected more uncertainty into Europe's economy by raising doubts about the continued supply of Russian natural gas. Such turbulence is the last thing that Europe's fragile recovery needs, as mass unemployment now propels the rise of right-wing parties and threatens the future of the European Union. I should say, post this piece, right-wing parties all over Europe, far-right parties in many cases, won huge in elections. The UK Independence Party in the UK won, the Le Pen National Front in France won, Golden Dawn in Greece, the European elections. So, yeah. Any new business downturn in Europe also would inflict harm on the U.S. economy, which itself is still clawing its way out of a long recession. Yep. But the crisis in Ukraine, spurred on by Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs Victoria Nuland and other anti-Russian hardliners, is now complicating the U.S. recovery too. This is absolutely correct. This is actually, yeah, putting fuel on the fire. Yet, even as President Putin and other Russian leaders have tempered their rhetoric regarding Ukraine in recent weeks, the U.S. State Department continues to talk tough, bombarding Putin with both warnings and insults. Typical work, the comments in the lead story of the Washington Post on Saturday, with writer Karen DeYoung quoting State Department and other U.S. officials berating Putin despite his conciliatory remarks about his willingness to work with the new Ukrainian government. She wrote, Western governments expressed deep uncertainty at what Russia will do, and it was symptomatic of their equally deep mistrust of Putin that took him at his word. The Post quoted the harsh rhetoric emanating from the State Department spokesman Marie Harf, who told the Russians, pull the rest of your troops back, put your money where your words are, come on. Come on! But Young's characterization of Russian-inspired violence fits with the official Washington's groupthink that has treated the Ukraine crisis as instigated by Putin, supposedly so he can begin reclaiming territory lost when the Soviet Union collapsed. But the evidence clearly indicates that the uprising in Kiev was driven by a mix of popular dissatisfaction with Yanukovych, Western support and encouragement for disorders, and violent neo-Nazi militias that, despite the ethnic Russians in the East, that despised the ethnic Russians in the East and spearheaded the February 22 putsch that drove Yanukovych from power. Right, and is this in U.S. interest? Not really. It may be understandable at some point that the still powerful neocons saw Ukraine as a wedge, a useful tool in splintering the Putin-Obama cooperation that had eased tensions over Syria and Iran to the neocons' top targets for regime change, but it remains a mystery how anyone could think that the Ukraine adventure has served U.S. national interests. Good point. Story number 9. This is kind of a long piece. Hacker, creeper, soldier, spy. Matt DeHart, a former U.S. soldier seeking asylum in Canada, claims he's wanted for working with Anonymous. The U.S. says he may be a spy. And dun, dun, dun. The distraught prisoner, Matt DeHart, a 29-year-old American who had earlier brought to jail days earlier by Canada Border Services Agency, official and 5 police officers who arrested him at the apartment he shares with his parents while fighting for refugee protection here. Pulled from the cell and taken to a hospital, he appeared to suffer no serious physical injuries and underwent a mental health assessment. After returning to jail, Matt then dived headfirst from his bunk into the concrete floor of his cell, requiring another urgent hospital visit. He told doctors he had crashed on purpose because he had no hope. Days later, Matt appeared by video link at a detention review before a tribunal of Canada's Immigration and Refugee Board. It took half an hour for jail guards to retrieve him from a 101-to-1 suicide watch cell and sit him in front of the camera. Matt peered into the lens. He looked dreadful, unshaven and unkempt, his eyes red and swollen, his lids heavy. He squinted and grimaced. It's not that I'm not patriotic, I am. I voted for Bush. My family was military, pretty gung-ho, but everything has changed. Okay, so I guess so. This is gone with his bravado, almost goofy smile. He seemed shy about flashing. His father, Paul DeHart, a retired U.S. Air Force major who worked in the powerful NSA, sat grim-faced watching his son on video. We're here on a claim of torture, Paul said, his voice straining as he stated Matt had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. To visit your son in a maximum security prison in a suicide schmuck, more heavily medicated than he's ever been. For anyone with PTSD to be treated that way, much less your own child, is very disturbing. Okay, this is decidedly not how DeHart's envisioned life in Canada as they drove across the border a little more than a year earlier. On April 3rd, 2013, seeking refugee protection, they claim U.S. authorities tortured Matt during a national security investigation. Okay, everything about the case of Matthew Paul DeHart is unusual. Much of it is also dramatic and perplexing. It is a story moving from his early involvement in Anonymous, the international hacktivist group, to his discovery of a sensitive national security document, perhaps destined for WikiLeaks, the whistleblowing on a hidden computer server he hosted back when he was a cocky internet freedom fighter. From there, it twists to being charged in the United States with soliciting the production of child pornography, something he and his parents claim is a cruel ruse by U.S. agents to help them attack Anonymous and WikiLeaks. And still another bombshell claim is made in classified documents. Matt may have tried to sell military secrets to the Russian government and had moved to Canada to facilitate contact with Russian agents. What is going on? It might seem absurd. It does. Hacker, creeper, soldier, spy. A months-long investigation by the National Post reveals a case deserving close scrutiny, despite, perhaps because of its layers of secrecy and occasional stumble into dark crevices of security, surveillance, and spies, as well as questions of mental health, sexual deviancy, and crime. So I can't keep going further into this, but let's just a little bit more. Documents confirm, for instance, that while Matt is charged in the U.S. only for child porn, he was actually arrested, imprisoned, and interrogated by the FBI in an espionage probe. Once in Canada, he was interviewed by Canada's spy agency and his file assigned to Canada Border Services Agency Security and Crimes Unit. As for the porn charge, it too is odd, as described by U.S. judge. A second U.S. judge, after hearing the government's porn case, added that the weight of the evidence is not as firm as I thought. Okay. So we'll have to, this is something worth reading. I'll put in the roundup and maybe get back. It does seem weird. Story number 8, the FT gets Piketty's capital argument wrong. Chris Giles at the FT just wrote a critique of the data, and Thomas, this is from Next New Deal. Chris Giles at the FT just wrote a critique of the data and Thomas Piketty's capital. Many people rightfully debate the empirics of what Giles has found, which he believes shows the inequality of the ownership of wealth, how much wealth is held by the top 1%, isn't increasing. But it's important to understand how it fits into a larger argument. The problem with the theory, Giles writes, the central theme of Professor Piketty's work is that wealth inequalities are heading back up to levels last seen before the First World War. This is incorrect, or at least badly stated. Piketty's central theme is not that inequality of the ownership of wealth is going to skyrocket. If you look at the text, he's somewhat agnostic about this, but it's not determinative. The central theme is that the 1% already owns a lot of the capital stock, and the capital stock is going to get gigantic relative to the rest of the economy. Inequality expert Branko Milan also tweeted this point, but let's go through it and review the breakdown Piketty's puts forward. The return of capital is greater than the growth rate, the infamous R greater than G inequality. Meanwhile, growth begins to slow, perhaps because of demographics. The amount of capital or private wealth relative to the size of the economy will begin to grow rapidly as growth slows. This is the past tense of devour the future line. If the rate of return doesn't fall or doesn't fall that quickly, the capital share of income will increase. more of our economic pie will go to people who own capital. The ownership of capital is very concentrated historically and across a wide variety of countries. It is unlikely to fall quickly, much less spontaneously democratize itself in response to those trends. Yep. Piketty's conclusion. Okay. Giles states that it is not possible to say anything much about the top 10% share between 1870 and 1960, as the data for the U.S. simply does not exist. However, as Matt Brunig points out, since Piketty's book came out, there's been significant new work by Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zuckman telling us exactly that. Check out the slides. They're awesome. All respected work that fills in the makeshift gaps Piketty had to use to make the wealth inequality data for the United States in this period. This is a sign of a good work. Subsequent work is bearing out its results. Okay. Story number 7. This is an interesting take by Ross Douthat, how the Tea Party, this upcoming Republican presidential primary is going to determine the legacy of the Tea Party. The Tea Party, was it destroyed in the 2014, or has it just succeeded so much the Republican Party has become the Tea Party? It depends on who wins these primaries. Jeb Bush will be a destruction of it. Paul Victory will make it the Tea Party libertarian. Cruz more ideological. Interesting read. Story number 6. Marty. Snowden considers returning to the U.S. Rahili, American whistleblower Edward Snowden, is considering returning home to the U.S. under certain conditions, his lawyer told German news organization Der Spiegel. There are negotiations, Snowden's lawyer, Wolfgang Kalleck, told Der Spiegel. Those who know the case are aware that an amicable agreement with the U.S. authorities will be most reasonable. All efforts are now focused on finding a solution acceptable for Edward Snowden, at least in the medium term, according to Kalleck, who is also Secretary General for the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights. Meanwhile, former NSA contractor isn't involved in these negotiations, according to Kalleck, who added his client never acted selfishly and caused no damage. That's why one could hope that a democratic U.S. government paves the way back for him. Good luck with that. Story number 5. Scientists study the effect of magic mushrooms on personality. The results are startling. I've been seeing this. This is one of the first times I saw it, and Policy Mike's pretty decent, so I've seen it around, but it's always been these sources that are weird, so I kind of ignored it. It turns out the psychedelics aren't just good for turning into an elf and jousting a car. Okay. Psychiatrists, psychologists, and specialists in addiction and recovery from traumatic experiences have been investigating the use of hallucinogens in treatment programs, and the results indicate that psychedelics actually have practical therapeutic uses. And one drug has proven particularly useful. Repeated studies have found the psychedelic compound found in magic mushrooms, psilocybin, can help people move past major life issues like beating alcoholism and becoming more empathetic. Interesting. How about that? One study concluded that controlled exposure to psilocybin would have long-lasting medical and spiritual benefits. In 2011, Johns Hopkins researchers found that by giving volunteer test subjects just the right dose, they were able to reliably induce transcendental experiences in volunteers. This provoked long-lasting psychological growth and helped the volunteers to find peace in their lives, all without side effects. How about that? So, apparently, magic mushrooms. There you go. Story number 4. Oopsies, that's not a story. Oh, I fucked this up. That's, by the way, read this anyway. Job insecurity of workers is a big factor in Fed policy. This is from 1997, where Alan Greenspan admitted that keeping people in debt, keeping workers, low-wage workers, middle-class workers in debt was a great way to prevent worker strikes and therefore created workplace stability. We'll call this story number 3. Karzai refused to meet Obama at Bagram Air Base, says U.S. official. Afghan President Hamid Karzai was was offered a meeting with President Barack Obama at Bagram Air Base outside Kabul, but declined. A U.S. official said Sunday. The official said that Washington was not surprised that the meeting did not work out at short notice after Obama arrived at the base on a surprise visit. As we said, we weren't planning for a bilateral meeting. We did offer him the opportunity to come to Bagram, but we're not surprised he didn't work on it. Obama and Karzai have had a testy relationship, and Washington has been deeply frustrated by the outgoing Afghan leader's refusal to sign a bilateral security agreement that would allow it to lock in a post-2014 U.S. troop training mission in the country. Story number 2, speaking of Afghan screw-ups, White House mistakenly identifies CIA chief in Afghanistan. Whoops. The CIA's top officer in Kabul was exposed Saturday by the White House when his name was inadvertently included on a list provided to news organizations of senior U.S. officials participating in President Obama's surprise visit with U.S. troops. The White House recognized the mistake and quickly issued a revised list that did not include the individual who had been identified on the initial release as the chief of station in Kabul, a designation used by the CIA for its highest-ranking spy in a country. The disclosure marked a rare instance in which a CIA officer working overseas had his cover, the secrecy meant to protect his actual identity, pierced by his own government. The only other recent case came under significantly different circumstances when former CIA operative Valerie Plame was exposed as officials of the George W. Bush administration sought to discredit her husband. The Post is withholding the name of the CIA officer at the request of the Obama administration officials who have warned that the officer and his family could be at risk if the name were published. Wow. So there you go. Pretty dumb. And I guess I was going to do number 1 story. I guess a lot of things are going wrong today. It's Memorial Day. So I was going to talk about the Ukrainian election that occurred. This is the number 1 story. West Ukraine elects oligarch president. East stays home. On Sunday, Petro Poroshenko, a pro-EU billionaire known as the Chocolate King from his candy business, was elected president by voters in the western part of Ukraine. Poroshenko is one of Ukraine's powerful oligarchs and appears to have enough of a majority over former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko to avoid a runoff. The people of East Ukraine did not participate in the election, raising serious questions about Poroshenko's legitimacy and mandate to govern all of Ukraine. Not to mention, Poroshenko is a president cut from the same cloth as ousted President Yanukovych, a creature of Ukraine's corrupt politics. Poroshenko has claimed he will support the pro-EU agreements, whose rejection became a trigger for a U.S. and EU-backed coup, though he also has his own business interest in Russia. A key issue for Poroshenko now is whether or not to call early parliamentary elections, as many in Ukraine want to be rid of the gang in Kiev that was brought to power through violence and has minimal support even in Western Ukraine. Agreeing to call those elections might cause further unrest. And of course, there is the question of what Poroshenko plans to do about Russia, who is now demanding billions for unpaid natural gas bills and threatening to wreck Ukraine's anemic economy. If they do not get paid, Poroshenko's pro-EU positions may become a stumbling block in energy negotiations with Russia. The parts of East Ukraine that declared independence did not vote in Sunday's election and no longer see themselves as part of Ukraine. For them, the election was a foreign affair. And that was the top 10 at 10. If you have a story you'd like me to feature on the top 10 at 10, please tweet me at Dan. That's right. And be sure to read all the stories at 5outgroup.com. Thanks for watching. See you later.